Prynhawn da, croeso bawb, i'n digwyddiad ni heddiw. I'm David Tudur and I'm Head of Engagement here at the National Library. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's event, this gallery talk on our main exhibition at the moment here in Oriel Greganog, Portrait and Power, Portread a Phŵer. Today's speaker is Mari Elin Jones, who has curated this exhibition. She's a member of the exhibitions team working here at the library, and she's been working here for over 10 years on a number of major exhibitions. After Mari Elin has given us our talk, and interpretation will be provided today by Tony Evans. This is our first BSL interpreted talk, and we are very pleased to welcome Tony and hope that you all enjoy the event. There will be an opportunity for questions after the talk, and then for you to wander around the exhibition and enjoy. There is no fire drill organised today, so if the fire alarm does go off today, we will guide you towards the fire exits and out of the building until it's clear for us to return. A gyda hynny o eiriau, and without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mari Elin Jones. Diolch fawr.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this BSL Interpreted Portrait and Power Gallery talk, and a warm welcome to you watching from home as well. So as David mentioned, my name is Mari Elin, and I'm the library's interpretation officer, and I curated this exhibition. And this afternoon, I'll be talking about the background to the exhibition. I'll give you an overview of the themes within and go into some detail about just some of the key works. So in essence, Portrait and Power is an exhibition that asks visitors to look and look again. It explores how portraits are connected to power, who gets seen, who's looking, and who holds the power. So, how did this exhibition begin? Well, the exhibition began as a much smaller show back in 2019, when our satellite gallery in Riverside, Haverfordwest, was part of the National Gallery of London's Masterpiece Tour. An exhibition curated around Edgar Degas' portrait of Helen Roy in her father's study was good to go when COVID hit. But finally, in 2022, we opened the exhibition Gaze, where Degas' portrait was shown alongside a small selection of around a dozen works from our own national collection. And it looked at the theory of the male and female gaze and considered how women were portrayed by male and female artists. And we could see from that show that we had the makings of a much larger exhibition. And, as it happened, at the same time, the art collection itself was growing and developing. So, during these last few years, the library has actively been developing the collection by purchasing and commissioning more work by women, global majority artists, working class artists and queer artists, in order to begin to address the historical gaps that exist in our collection. For a long time, public collections only represented a part of society. And this, I think, is especially true of portrait collections, as historically, portraits were often made of the rich, the powerful, and the culturally privileged. But Welsh history is more than one face and one story. And this exhibition asks us to look again at images of who we decide to preserve and to celebrate. So, what can be seen in the gallery today? The exhibition revolves around three central ideas or questions. Representation. Who gets portrayed? The gaze, how power flows between the artist, the sitter, and the viewer. And belonging, what does it mean to be seen or not be seen? And how do people see themselves in the context of Wales's visual culture? These ideas connect works that were created hundreds of years ago with works created only a few months ago. And the starting point in curating this show was to look at what kind of images we had in the National Portrait Collection. And though there were many to choose from, there were obvious gaps too. And so, with exciting new purchases and contemporary commissions, we began to broaden the diversity of the collection and its contemporary relevance. The exhibition is organised thematically, but one theme flows into the next, and there are no strict rules about how to move around the gallery. At the end of today's talk, there'll be an opportunity for you to explore the exhibition in your own time. And you'll see with each theme, there's an introduction, and these tend to end with a question. And I encourage you to keep those questions in mind as you look at the portraits and to come to your own conclusions. There's no right way or wrong way to look at art. And very often it's worth looking closely at the artworks before turning to read the captions. I always like to think and guess who's painted what before I start reading. And one of the aims of the exhibition is to make visiting a national art gallery a comfortable and an exciting experience, and an inclusive one where no prior knowledge is needed to benefit from what's on display. But before you set off to explore, I'll say a little bit about some of the key themes and works on view here in Portrait and Power. So, the power of the gaze. In 1972, art critic John Berger, in his book Ways of Seeing, revealed how portraits of women especially often reflect the power of the viewer. Feminist and post-colonialist critics expanded this theory, showing how gender, race, class and colonial histories influenced who is represented, how and why. To quote Berger, the gaze is not just a matter of looking, but also of power and control. And it's true. Every time we look at something, there's a kind of power involved. In portraits, this dynamic is heightened. The way we look at the image helps create its meaning, and the image can either reflect or resist. We bring our own ideas and prejudices with us when looking at art. Because the act of looking is more than just seeing. It's also a tool for shaping identity, reinforcing norms, and even exercising control. Now, I'll be mentioning the gaze theory quite a few times during this talk, and it's this theory which suggests that the way women are presented in the visual arts comes from a male heterosexual viewpoint, where they are shown as sexual objects for the pleasure of the male viewer. Men have the power, and women are passive and objectified. But history has shown the courage of women to challenge their lack of representation, with female artists playing with the idea of the male gaze and using their art to criticize and to subvert the limits of femininity that were imposed on them. Now, one question I've been asked more often than I had anticipated is, where are the men? And that question really reveals the core of the exhibition. So Portrait and Power focuses on women as subjects of portraits as well as artists. Because although we've been looking at women for centuries, they were really seen. Historically, portraits have depicted women according to external expectations. The male gaze, social norms, fantasies about femininity, or ideals of beauty or motherhood. In many collections, including ours, pictures of women are plentiful, but we don't always get to learn much about them, how they saw themselves, or how their lives felt from their own point of view. Portraits of men will always be easy to find. Portraits that focus on real lives and the presence of women are still much rarer, which is why they are at the heart of this show. So, two works that I think illustrate this theory of the male-female gaze are Anne Griffiths by Cyffin Williams and Shadows by Shani Rhys-James. A key figure in the history of Welsh art, Cyffin Williams is best known for his landscapes of the mountains of Rhyri, painted in his characteristic impasto technique and bold impressionistic style. Now, Cyffin did not see himself as a traditional portrait painter, but he produced portraits because, as he said, he was obsessed with people. Speaking about his portraits, he said, "In my own work, I have simply tried to get a likeness. Only subconsciously may I at times have revealed some hidden aspect of the character of my sitter. In the case of this portrait of Anne Griffiths, however, what we see is not a portrait that reveals a hidden aspect of the sitter's character, but perhaps rather something of the artist himself. Anne Griffiths was a harpist who won the Premier Prix at the Conservatoire in Paris in the class of the legendary Pierre Jamet, becoming the first British harpist ever to do so. While living in Paris, but back home visiting Wales, Cyffin painted this portrait of her. Now, she was aware that she would be immortalised in this image, and she carefully considered what to wear, choosing one of her favourite garments, something I think she would probably have felt comfortable and, very comfortable in, a pink top. However, to her great surprise, when she saw this finished portrait, she saw that Cyffin had painted her in black. And when she asked him why, he explained that he wanted her to resemble the famous French singer Edith Piaf. So this portrait shows how the artist's gaze can shape the way we see the subject. An example of how a portrait can reveal more about the intentions of the artist than about a woman's own sense of self. By contrast, we have this self-portrait by Shani Rhys James, which is considerably more candid. Shani Rhys James is one of Wales's best-known contemporary artists, renowned for her emotionally charged, expressive portraits. Her work often reveals the intensity of the gaze, raw, vulnerable, and honest, offering images that directly challenge the conventions of the gaze. Many of her bold, vividly coloured works include elements of self-portraiture. She has said herself, "Often I paint self-portraits, myself in the studio, surrounded by the studio debris, the figure either caught in the mirror as if trapped, or standing amongst a sea of gloves. The self-portrait is a means to get inside my own head." And her series of heads includes some of her most intense self-portraits, with her face filling the small canvases. She uses a small hand mirror, and as a result, must confront herself face to face again and again. She mainly employs a restricted palette of red, black, and white, with the paint applied generously and roughly, creating a raw image that suggests a layer has been peeled away from the artist's own face in order to be able to portray herself on canvas. Rejecting traditional conventions, she avoids idealizing herself, presenting a woman without a mask, as a person, as a painter. And here, she depicts herself in an uncompromising way, her large, wide eyes staring directly at us. By challenging us so directly, she questions how women are supposed to be seen, reclaiming the power of the portrait for herself. Now, a number of women have turned to the medium of the self-portrait to challenge the male gaze, and the idea that women only exist as objects of pleasure for men. And these self-portraits reflect their inner lives, their complexities, and their power on their own terms. These works invite us to engage with the perspective constructed by the women themselves, shifting the focus from the external to the internal. In this section, you will see some quite classic self-portraits, but there are also pieces here that challenge traditional ideas, such as these works by Brenda Chamberlain and Maria Hayes. So, an artist and a writer, Brenda Chamberlain divided her life between Wales and the Greek island of Hydra. Her work often explores solitude, creativity, and inner life. And the groups of work on display here, they're all black and white drawings. They shed light on the complexities of the self-portrait. Brenda Chamberlain's self-portraits often reflect her inner world and reveal considerable emotional depth. Rather than idealized images, they present a thoughtful, sometimes troubled figure, confronting both herself and her surroundings. In the final years of her life, when she was suffering from depression, she created drawings of heads that appear bound, constrained, or under intense pressure, images of despair and isolation. And you'll also see one of the Black Brides series. So the works of the Black Brides are among some of Brenda Chamberlain's most impressive, yet unsettling works. And they're works that she herself acknowledges to be disturbing work that she can't really explain. They all show a bride in a similar pose, covered by a veil that sometimes looks like a fishing net or a shroud. The works explore loss, rituals, and identity, and may reflect the artist's own struggles and views on femininity, with the veil becoming a symbol of despair and sadness. Another artist who engages with inner life through a pair of unusually candid self-portrait is Mari Hayes. A multidisciplinary artist, her work often explores identity, place, and the body. In Map Woman, she examines her cultural and national identity. At heart, Mari Hayes sees herself as the product of migration, Irish on her father's side and Welsh on her mother's. She was born in Wales, but raised largely in England, moving frequently. She returned to live in Wales in 1992. To create this piece, Map Woman, she lay on a table and outlined her body using a feather dipped in ink. She then cut fragments of maps of all the places she had lived and glued them onto the surface, beginning with the head and working her way down the spine. She collected mud from Manod, where she was living at the time, and filled the outline of her body with a mountain soil, a symbol representing her desire to put down roots. And shown alongside Map Woman is Divided Self, a set of painted nesting dolls. This work attempts to explore the different and distinct identities that come together to form a complete picture of her personality. Using ink alone, she worked instinctively, deciding what each doll would represent as she moved from the smallest to the largest. She says, "The tiniest doll I painted gold, deciding that is what is at the center of each of us. Then I did skeleton self, then nature self, moody self, woman self, artist self, then the whole of me, the container doll." And although these self-portraits don't show the artist's face, they do reveal a lot about her and show how a self-portrait can show truth without showing likeness. Now, one of my favourite parts of the exhibition is what I call the Gwen John wall, where we see a self-portrait displayed alongside two portraits of her by people who knew her well. One by her close friend, Mary Constance Lloyd, and the other by her brother, Augustus John. And together, these works show just how differently a single person can be seen, by herself, by another woman, and by a man who also happened to be one of the most prominent artistic personalities of his generation, as well as her brother. Gwen John is now recognised as one of Britain's most important artists of the early 20th century. Her work is quiet, introspective, and psychological, and she is best known for her quiet portraits and her subtle treatment of tone and mood. And in this pencil self-portrait, she appears calm, natural, giving us a sense of her as a private, thoughtful artist rather than a public persona. Then Mary Constance Lloyd studied alongside Gwen John at the Slade School of Art in London, and both moved to Paris at the same time. The two were close friends, and Gwen often modelled for Constance. Now, I don't see a performance in this portrait of her, but an artist who has captured a friend immersed in her own thoughts. Quite a radical thing at a time when women were so often painted as objects for display. And I think this portrait is an example of how many female artists often saw each other with more empathy and honesty than their male counterparts. And then Augustus John. Gwen's brother was one of the most famous artists of his day, a colourful, fiery character who was widely celebrated, although we're not so sure these days. His portrait of Gwen shows her in fancy dress, and there is a certain theatrical feel to the work, which possibly says more about Augustus than about Gwen herself. And looking at these three works together, we see that a portrait is not just about its subject, but about the relationship between the artist, the sitter, and the viewer. Different gazes construct different versions of the same person. Now, the absence of some faces is just as powerful as their presence. Portraits can show not only who is included, but also who is left out, and why being seen is so important. Post-colonial perspectives reveal how colonial and racist power shaped what was preserved or erased. Although there are many gaps in the library's collection of historical portraits, recent editions try to redress the balance. And these works confront the history of erasure of persons, including women, global majorities, disabled people, LGBTQ+ communities, and others whose identities have often been marginalized in mainstream culture. And this is not just an exercise in filling gaps, but it's challenging the systems that created those gaps in the first place. Now, the first work we have here is by Natalie Chapman. Natalie Chapman is a contemporary figurative artist known for her bold and colourful autobiographical works, which explore working class life, female identity, and social stigma. In this piece, entitled "Given a Little Time, We Could Have Been a Different Class," she paints the women of her family, placing them at the centre of a bold composition. It honours the strength of women across generations and highlights the absence of working class lives in art. Now, this piece is a commissioned work for the library and has been created in response to the representation of women as artists and as subjects of works of art since 1945 in our collections. Now, central to this work is a reflection on class and its underrepresentation within portraiture. Historically, working class people have appeared in art as anonymous labourers, portrayed in fields or factories, but they were hardly given the dignity of portraiture as subjects. Her own upbringing in social housing, within a family supported by benefits, has informed her desire to bring these lived realities into the frame. Lidl's opening times posted on the wall are a subtle but direct note of class, an everyday object that conveys order and living in an affordable way to survive. The figures in the painting are the artist family: her mother, her sister, herself, and their children. Generations of women are represented, each showing resilience in overcoming stigma with care and strength. Natalie herself said about this work, "Through this layering of domestic memory, symbolism, and portraiture, the painting becomes both personal and political, a celebration of working class women's endurance, beauty, and presence within a tradition that has too often overlooked them." Another commissioned work is Black Futures, a set of photographs by Taye Omokore. And these were created in 2025 as part of the library's anti-racism project. As a Nigerian photographer living in Wales, Taye's work is rooted in his exploration into the connections between his heritage and his adopted home. He is fascinated by the ways in which the cultures of Nigeria and Wales reflect each other, sometimes in ways that are surprisingly similar, but which remain different in their expressions. For this project, he was fascinated by the Welsh hat, an iconic symbol of Wales's national identity, and he set about trying to reinterpret it through the lens of its cultural context. The Welsh hat, traditionally worn by women as part of the national costume, dates back to the 18th and 17th centuries. It is often attributed to Lady Llanover, an enthusiastic patron of Welsh culture, who encouraged the wearing of traditional dress as a way of showing national pride. And over time, the hat became a symbol of Welsh identity, a very prominent symbol in historical images taken by photographers such as John Thomas and Jeff Charles, whose extensive work documented various aspects of Welsh life, from rural communities and working class industries to important cultural and political events. And although these collections offer a rich insight into the history of Wales, they also shine a light on the gaps, especially in terms of the representation of black individuals and other minority communities who have been part of Welsh society for a long time. Despite the long history of multicultural communities in Wales, the photographic record failed to acknowledge their presence as part of the nation's cultural patchwork. And this exclusion of those who maybe don't fit neatly into conventional notions of national identity had a huge impact on Taye. And this inspired him to reimagine the Welsh hat in a way that reflects his own identity and the evolving cultural landscape of Wales. In this series, he interweaves African textiles as a background in some images, with the vibrant patterns symbolising his Nigerian heritage. He then went a step further by incorporating African textiles into the hats themselves, uniting two cultural identities in a unified visual statement. By doing this, it creates a dialogue between the past and the present, between tradition and transformation. The images in this series challenge the idea of national identity as something static, instead celebrating the fluid nature of culture and the contributions of black individuals to society. Through this work, he seeks to expand the visual narrative of Welsh heritage, ensuring that future generations can see themselves reflected in the collections of the National Library. Now, as we move across to the other side of the gallery, we're met by portraits of women in all their different aspects: their bodies, the experience of aging, women as models and as mothers. Now, over the centuries, women's bodies, shaped by race, class, sexuality and disability, have been prominent subjects in portraiture. Too often, these portraits reflected the wishes or ideas of the people in power, especially male patrons and artists, rather than the reality of the woman herself. The body became something to look at, rather than an individual with its own voice. Feminist thinkers such as Laura Mulvey have shown how the male gaze shapes the way women's bodies are portrayed, influencing their posture, their clothes, and even their expressions. In her work, Visual and Other Pleasures, she notes, "In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female." The portraits that can be seen in this section challenge traditions, and the body is reimagined and used to express identity, vulnerability, and power. This work, the poster image for the exhibition, is by Sue Williams. She is a conceptual artist who works with drawing, performance, and installations to question the representation of women's bodies, sexuality, and lived experience. Her work disrupts the traditions of polite portrayal, demanding that we reconsider how women are viewed and who controls the narrative. Unblushing combines bold brushwork and raw lines with a striking raised hand across the canvas. And behind the hand, a small eye looks out, half hidden but present. Sue Williams's loose, energetic marks create a tension between concealment and revelation. The work encourages us to consider what remains private, what is made visible, and how power and vulnerability can coexist in portraits. Now, for centuries, women have acted as models and inspiration for artists. Often they would appear not as themselves, but as a wife, a lover, a child, or inspiration for the artist. A woman can be idealized, a lover can be romanticized, and a daughter can be kept in the innocence of childhood. But quite often, traces of the real person can also break through. Now, this portrait of Catriona MacLeod is an extremely interesting one. Catriona was an artist and a musician who married her fellow artist, Joseph Herman, in 1942. They both studied and exhibited in Scotland before settling in Llyfrgell, South Wales, in the middle of a vibrant and artistic community. An artist and heir to a famous whiskey company, Catriona was not a passive woman. She painted, designed, and performed. And although this portrait is attributed to Joseph Herman, placing Catriona firmly in the traditional role of the muse, it has recently been suggested that it could be a self-portrait by Catriona herself. And this uncertainty changes how we read the painting. If she is the artist, she asserts her power. a woman shaping her own image rather than being shaped by someone else's view. Placed in the model and muse section, the painting becomes a gentle but powerful provocation. How many portraits of women have been attributed to the men around them? And how many creative voices have gone unrecognised? Here, Catriona is subject and artist. Now, patriarchal culture often erases older women from visual culture. When they do appear, it's usually in a narrow or stereotypical role. But artists have challenged this attitude, presenting older women with tenderness, humour and strength. And these portraits ask, why do we associate value with youth? And how can showing older women challenge common ideas about beauty and value? Here, age is not a decline, but another form of power. Now, this first portrait here is by Arian Short. She was a prominent figure in the world of embroidery, as an artist, a lecturer, and an author. Over the decades during which she stitched, Arian addressed a wide range of subjects, including the landscape of Pembrokeshire, wildlife, death, and grief. According to the artist herself, it was in the moments between these themes that the greatest challenge lay, portraying herself in stitch. As a craft traditionally associated with women and domesticity, embroidery has long been used as a means of educating women in feminine ideals, and as a kind of proof that those ideals have been achieved. At the same time, however, it has also served as a tool for resisting the constraints of femininity. In this self-portrait, which is embroidered and which was created when Arian was in her 80s, she portrays herself with honesty and vitality. Every stitched line transforms signs of aging into markers of experience. Here, Arian uses the most feminine of arts to take control of her own image. It's a portrait of an artist confident both in her medium and in herself. Now, the mainstream media is full of images of older people portrayed as a burden, people with nothing left to give, just waiting to die. Age Cymru did a project, This is Older, and this project aimed to dispel those negative stereotypes of older people and celebrate their diversity and vitality, and remind the rest of us that there is no such thing as a typical older person. Now, this set of photographs, they were taken by the artist John Poutney, and he is inspired by people, place, and history. And John's intention is to tell stories through images, and each of the individuals featured has something to say. Lynette Johnson believes that an active life is what keeps her young, and she hates it when the older people are portrayed as passive figures deserving of pity. She says, "We don't fit into that mould, and a lot of people don't fit into that mould. The image one had, say, 30 years ago of an older person, that has totally changed." Then we have Annie. Annie is proof that you are never too old to learn new things. She completed her undergraduate degree in art history at the age of 54 and went on to complete a master's degree and her PhD in her early 60s. And she joked, "I'm still waiting to feel grown up." Then Gaynor Jones. Gaynor restores motorbikes and practices her dance moves. She said, "I didn't think I'd be doing this at nearly 70. I thought I'd be walking around with a stick. It's a stereotype, and people do get discriminated against because of their age, which is silly, really." And This is Older. This set of photographs demonstrates how portraiture can extend beyond traditional boundaries to include older bodies, older lives, and the stories that come with them. These photographs give visibility to people who are often excluded from cultural narratives about identity, belonging, and representation. They present aging as part of the human experience, something to be celebrated rather than hidden. Then we come to the last section of the exhibition, motherhood. And motherhood is one of the most common themes and one of the most idealised in portraiture. From the Virgin Mary to the modern mother, images of mothers often reflect cultural expectations rather than real experiences. In the works that can be seen here, being a mother is portrayed not only as a role, but as a relationship, shaped by intimacy, memories, endurance, love, and loss. Some portraits do embrace traditional ideas about mothers, while others challenge or complicate them. Together, they show the many aspects of being a mother. Now, this pair of works is by Seren Morgan Jones. As an artist who explores gender, identity, and historical representation, Seren often reimagines how women appear in cultural memory. Her work reclaims space for women as central figures, unyielding, self-defining, and visually powerful. This pair of portraits reimagines the traditional mother and child theme through the Welsh legend of Ceridwen and her daughter Creirwy. Ceridwen is a powerful woman, a sorceress and a mother, renowned for her wisdom and her ability to transform. Her children, the monstrous Morfran and the beautiful Creirwy, are traditionally defined solely by their appearance. Here, however, Seren presents them as real women, complex, older, imperfect, and full of life, granting them a depth that goes beyond the traditional legends. Now, to finish, this is another brand new commission called The New Accession by Bedwyr Williams. A multidisciplinary artist working across performance, video, installation, and drawing, he is known for his satirical perspectives on identity and social roles. This particular work is inspired by the library's historical portrait collection and asks us to question who is given space within public collections. So here we encounter a group of portraits of men looking down from a metal grid which has been inspired by the library's storage systems. Among them is a single figure who may be a woman, subtly challenging traditional ideas of portraiture. The work invites us to consider how new works enter the collection. The empty space, you see, signals both absence and potential, reminding us to reflect on which faces and which voices are preserved, and which have yet to be included. So what's next? This exhibition is part of a long-term effort to expand the library's collections, to bring new voices to national prominence and to support contemporary artists working in Wales today. The hope that this is the start of a richer and more inclusive representation of a nation in all its diversity and complexity. I'd just like to thank you all for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to share the exhibition with you, and I hope it opens up some new ways of thinking about portraiture and about who belongs within our visual history. I'd also like to thank Tony for his interpretation, and I hope I didn't speak too quickly on Tregaron speed. So now, please take your time to enjoy the gallery, enjoy the exhibition, and I'll be very happy with Tony's assistance to answer any questions. But other than that, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.